Now is the time of year for preparations and plans, for getting the garden prepared for winter and for planning what you want to do during the winter to get it in its best shape possible for next year. So in this episode, I'm going to be showing you what I'm doing in the garden right now in October and letting you in on some of my future plans. Hey everyone, how's it going and welcome back. If you're already subscribed to the channel, brilliant. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, or if you're new, this is my channel all about everything I do in my garden and the plants that I love. And all you need to do to subscribe is hit that little button down there. Go and do that because you're not going to regret it. I can't believe how things have changed really quickly. It's only been a couple of weeks since I did my last garden update video, and look at the crabapple behind me. It's so full in fruit. The leaves are already starting to change now and it's this brilliant golden yellow colour. Absolutely delighted with it. Now, you may notice as well that I've shifted my garden update video to way earlier in the month. And the reason for that is I realised that I was spending all my month doing everything that needed to be done in October and then filming a video and telling you what I've done. But then I realised that that doesn't actually give you an opportunity to go and do some of that stuff in your garden if you see some inspiration or you get some inspiration from what I'm showing you. So from now on, I'm going to have this video earlier in the month and it's going to be a mix of two things. It's going to have what I'm doing in the garden at the moment, which might give you some inspiration. And I'm also going to let you know what I'm planning to do over the next couple of months. You'll know that earlier in the year I bought a whole load of new plants to put in the pond here in the back garden and the pond in the secret garden at the front of the house. Well, I chose a whole load of native Irish plants, or hardy plants that I knew would deal with the Irish climate, and in particular the cold, dark, wet Irish winters. But there's one exception to that, and it's this. Pistia stratiotes, or the water lettuce. I love this plant and I've talked in other videos about how great I think it is. Basically, it just forms what look like little floating lettuces on the surface of the water. Over time, they create more little plantlets that then break off and it continues to divide. Now, when the weather's good, it divides really quickly, so much so that in a lot of countries, and possibly in the country that you're watching from, this is an invasive species. It's not such an issue here in Ireland because the cold temperatures during the winter mean that a lot of it gets wiped out, and it also doesn't have that much time to really spread. Either way, I don't want to lose this, so what I'm going to do is lift all of the pieces of Pistia out of the water and then put them into this slightly unappealing plastic box. What I've done is I've filled that with some pond water just so that they don't get a real shock. And then this box is going to go into the conservatory and I'm going to overwinter all of these plants in the house. Fingers crossed they get through, and then I can bring them back out into the spring and put them in the ponds. What I'm not sure is whether I'm doing this too early or not, but what I do know is that I like them enough that I'm not willing to lose them. So I'm going to lift them now, well before a chance of really hard frosts, and I'll take them indoors. So I don't know whether you can see it or not at the minute, but it's actually started raining. So I'm going to keep going and see if I can get this done before I get soaked and my camera gets soaked. It's just been chucking it down with rain. And now I've just sat on a wet seat. Yuck. So I'm going to keep going because the rain has started again, and I'm going to see if I can keep getting through this section because this is... Right, third time lucky. And I've just sat on an even wetter seat. So one job that I'm doing at the moment, and it's a nice easy one and it's quite an enjoyable one, is to go around the garden either with a notepad and pen or a mobile phone, whatever you fancy, and observe the garden and take some notes about what's going well, what's going badly, and what you want to change. So here are a few of the things that I'm looking at the moment and taking notes on. I'm really happy with how well the echinops got on. I love them as plants anyway, and they look class, but I never staked them this year. And when we had a couple of storms during August, they've got a real battering and some of them have flopped. So going into the book, stake echinops next year. So do you remember my very first ever video that I made for this channel where I divided a hosta? Well, this is it. This is the mother plant, and you can see it's done really nicely, but there are two things that I'm going to note in the book for next year. The first thing is that it got really badly attacked by slugs during the damp summer. I'm going to need to do something about that next year so that it's better protected. The other thing, I only divided little bits off the side of it to make new plants, and you can see it's still massive. So next year it's going to get divided again, this time a little bit more harshly. I'll probably quarter it and make 4 really good sized plants. The other thing that's going in the book is to pull out the weeds out of the hedge behind me. I've talked for ages and several times on this channel about turning this whole space into a really epic veg garden. But now that I've been living here for about a year, I've realised that this space is just too big. If I made this all into a veg garden, it would be far too expensive to build and far too big for the needs of myself and my partner. So in my book, I'm going to take down the dimensions of the space, some notes about the fact that I do think it's too big, and then when I'm indoors, I can sit and have a think about how big a veg garden we actually need and how we're going to make that a reality. At the moment, my thought is that what we're going to do is have the veg garden at the far end, maybe coming down about 1/3 of this space, and then the rest, who knows what I'm going to develop it into. So you see, once you start observing, you do start seeing things that are worth noting down so that you can be prepared for next winter. Now, I said one of the things that I note down are things that I want to change, and that's why I'm sitting here in the secret garden. In previous videos, I've talked about how it's a lovely shaded, secluded spot, but it's actually a little bit too shaded and a little bit too secluded. You'll see from the shots that I'm about to put up, there's a lot of trees in here. There's also quite a lot of hedging, and what that's done is it's made a garden that, although it's lovely and quiet and secluded and sheltered, oftentimes it's actually just a little bit dark, a little bit dank, and actually you don't really get the full benefit of it. The other thing is it doesn't feel like there's enough airflow in the garden, and I think that's being shown in things like the box hedge, which I touched on a couple of weeks ago, where I think it's a little bit diseased. So the biggest project that I've got for this winter is this place, the secret garden. I'm going to take out one of the trees. I've decided it's going to be the willow tree because either side of it there's a lovely maple. There's also a lovely rowan. It can go. That's going to open up the kind of skyline here, bring in more light and more air. The next big change is the cypress hedge that runs along the edge of the garden. It's going to come out. I'm hoping that I'm going to get it out this winter. Now, the downside of that is it's going to make the secret garden a little less secret. But what it will do is it'll just bring more light in and really invigorate the space. And then the final big change that I'm going to make is the big square lawn. It's entirely going. We're going to put a new entrance in at the other corner of the garden where you're going to walk through, and instead what I'm going to have is a network of gravel paths that's going to work really nicely. Then there's going to be much less maintenance, no grass to cut, it'll be nicer to walk on, and in the space that's created, I'm going to have larger flower beds, and I'm going to make the secret garden a little haven of planting really interesting, varied plants. And I'm hoping that what it's going to be like is like a little bit of a jewel box full of interesting things to look at and a nice place to come and sit. But at the same time, just that little bit more open and that little bit more airy. So I'm going to bring you guys on that journey all the way through the winter. Once I get started, I'm going to do some dedicated videos on the renovation of this place. But there's another job that I'm doing at the moment, and it's down in the orchard. Loads has been happening in the orchard over the last couple of weeks, and if I'm honest, it's happened a little bit quicker than expected, because in my September garden tour video I was talking about would we get another good few weeks or even into months to get the apples ripe. That's because it's the first time that I've really kept apples, and they're riper much sooner than expected. So now what I'm doing is I'm doing 3 jobs around the apples. The first is I'm going around the apple tree. This is our most productive cooking apple tree, and I'm testing the apples to see whether they're ready, giving them a twist and just a lift. And that's typical. The one I try and twist on a video, it's not ready, so I'll have a go on another one while I'm chatting. But what I'm doing is I'm going round and lifting the decent apples like this so that they don't hit the ground first. They're then going into apple boxes, being set in carefully, and they're going to be stored somewhere cool and dark so that we can enjoy the apple harvest all the way through the winter. The next thing that I'm tackling are the windfall apples, and it's crazy. You can be in the garden and suddenly you'll just hear this thump, as one of the apples hits the ground. Those are the windfall apples, so I'm going round, lifting them and checking whether they're badly damaged or not. If they're not too badly damaged, I'm putting them in another box and I'm going to give them away to people that want them, and I'm going to try and use some of them myself, turning them into stewed apple that can be frozen for during the winter and into next year. And then the last are the damaged apples that have either been eaten or have really just started to rot. I'm lifting them off the ground and they're just getting composted or disposed of. The last thing I want is them sitting on the ground because they're going to kill off the grass underneath, which really isn't ideal. Now, speaking of the grass underneath, there's another project that I want to tell you about. So I did a video earlier in the summer where I lifted all of the spring bulbs from underneath the apple trees that the previous owners had planted. And the reason I did that was I wanted to really revamp this space. You can see at the moment that it's mainly just grass. It's a little bit boring, and I thought I could do something really interesting with more spring bulbs and more flowering plants. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought this is not going to be compatible with a lawnmower. We're not turning the whole place over to spring bulbs and flowers, so we need to be able to cut the grass. And if I'd naturalised those plants, particularly for like herbaceous plants or biennials like foxgloves, you can't just run over them with the lawnmower. So what I've decided to do to keep it a little bit neater is create a couple of orchard flower beds. So you can pretty much see the lines on the ground, I think, where I've gone along and marked out where those beds are going to be. We're going to have one large island bed that joins these two apple trees, and then another island bed that joins two trees further behind me. What it'll do is it'll create really nice planting spaces, but at the same time allow me to keep a grass area that you can walk through. So what I'm going to do is plant it up with spring bulbs, and that's going to be my first step in making these over. I went to the garden centre and truthfully I spent a little bit more than I should have on bulbs. I got 3 different types of bulbs that I'm going to mix in amongst all of the other bulbs that I already lifted that were in the garden. So first off, I've bought these Fritillaria meleagris, the snake's head fritillary. They're lovely. They're about 8 inches tall, little bell-shaped flowers that hang down in lovely sort of purple and white tones. They're absolutely gorgeous. So they're going to just be drifted in through these spaces. The other thing that I got was some anemones. Now these are dark purple anemones. They're called Bordeaux, and they'll flower a little bit later in the season, but I think they'll give a really interesting dark purple colour. And then following that theme, I bought a lot, and I mean a lot, of Queen of Night tulips. These are really tall. They're about 2 foot high, 24 inches tall. Dark, dark black purple colour. And I think when I mix them in with the existing bulbs, it's going to be really striking come spring. So for the next few weeks, I'm going to be busy getting stuck in with all of these, getting them planted into some lovely nice drifts, and then they'll be all set to go for spring. And then hopefully next spring, I'm going to have some foxgloves that I can plant in. And then over the next few years, I'm going to add more and more into these beds that will really make it something special. So you can see October in this garden is fairly busy, all right. So here are the top things that I'm going to be working on for the rest of the month. I'm going to keep harvesting the apples directly off the tree, picking the good ones, storing them carefully so that we can enjoy them for the rest of the winter. The wind-fallen ones, I'm going to be sorting between the good ones and the really smashed or damaged ones. The other thing then below the apple trees is that I'm going to keep working on those beds underneath and start putting in all of those spring bulbs. Then around the rest of the garden, we have a lot of deciduous trees. So it's going to be a case of every few days staying on top of all of the fallen leaves, because if they fall on plants or if they fall on the grass, they can kill areas off, and that is really not ideal. So that's going to keep me busy. And then finally, in the evenings or when the weather isn't so good, I'm going to be working on really detailing the plans that I have for the secret garden and the vegetable garden area. Taking some time to really work out what I'm going to do, how I'm going to do it, and when I'm going to do it. So how many days are there left in October? About 20, maybe less than 20. I'm going to be very busy. But I hope you enjoyed this. As ever, if you did, leave a comment down below because I love hearing from you. Make sure to hit that like button, the subscribe, and the notification bell, and then that way you'll be notified when I post my next video. And until next time, see you later.